Hey guys, give me 1 second. I'm gonna be inviting Somi. Let's see. She'll be probably joining us shortly. Hi, Selena. Hope everyone's having a great Thursday. It's almost Friday. Yay! Let's see. So Somi's here. So great to see you too, Selena. Well, I mean, I don't see you, but I see your comment. Okay, let me try sending another. I know she's here because I see her on here and she's waving at me. I'm going to exit and then come back in. So, oh, there we go. Here she is. So, I'm going to exit and then come back in. So, oh, there we go. Here she is.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So, hey everyone.
Hello, everyone.
This is Somi, my therapist. Some days I love her, and some days I strongly dislike her.
Wait a second. Oh, we love each other.
We do love each other. Some sessions are hard, though.
Yes, absolutely agreed. How are you
So,
today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm very, very well and I'm glad to be on here with you and, us having this really very necessary conversation.
Yes. So, today we will be talking, and Somi will be helping with trauma aware versus trauma informed.
Yes. So, obviously, this is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit. So, just to kind of give a background, Savannah and I met through someone we knew mutually back in June of 2019. So,
Yeah.
we are about, going on 3 years. Oh, 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
you know, Chalk it up to COVID. 2 years of knowing each other. And definitely can say when we first got together, Savannah was anti-therapy. So Savannah, do you want to talk just a little bit about that before I go into just kind of breaking down some stuff regarding being trauma informed versus trauma aware?
Yeah. So, my anti-therapy came from whenever something was wrong in my life, I'd have to go to therapy, and I didn't like it. I don't really like talking sometimes. And so, and when I came home from what happened to me, the first therapist I interviewed, I guess, made me tell my story right away. And she was very harsh and called what happened to me a hiccup, which didn't sit right with me. And when I met Somi, and our first call with Somi, she didn't want me to tell my story right away. She wanted to tell her when I was ready, which I greatly appreciate. And she's been my therapist ever since that first phone call.
Yeah. So one of the things that we had talked about, and this was also even a learning experience for you, was that so trauma, there's a drastic difference between being trauma aware and trauma informed. Being trauma aware is just like you understand, or not understand, you're aware of the prevalence of trauma and that the impact it has on people's lives. So for many people, and I'm just talking about professionals and non-professionals, the layman, whoever it is, we are now in a culture of trauma awareness. However, there are also different layers or steps to before you get to being trauma informed. So you go from being trauma aware, which is mostly about your attitude and the understanding of the prevalence of trauma and the impact it has on people that have been through traumatic situations. Then you move on to being trauma sensitive. So there's the element of trauma sensitivity. And that's when you're now gaining knowledge, you're slowly trying to apply that knowledge, you're trying to develop skill, you like develop skill sets involving that. So it's like the area of preparation of change. So you recognize, okay, this is something that is prevalent. Now we need to kind of prepare on how we go about to ensure that we do no harm, which is paramount in when you're dealing with a trauma victim, survivor, or even a thriver. The next step is being trauma responsive. This is when you actually implement, the changes you're working through, and you're ensuring that there's a lot of integration of the things that you have now, the knowledge you have gained. And then lastly, it's about being trauma informed. This is where it becomes, you embody these skills, you embody the change. It's you approach everything from the perspective of, is this going to do any additional harm to whoever I'm working with, or just interacting with? So it's very important that people know the difference. And because a lot of times we say trauma aware, but I'm like, there's a huge gap from being trauma aware to being trauma informed. Now, piggybacking on what you had said about the narrative part. So in my almost 15 years of working with trauma victims and trauma survivors, I have never had to ask a client or an individual, tell me your story. So one of the things I prided myself on earlier on when I was getting trained in this, someone told me, one of the best ways to approach trauma care or be more trauma informed is to use narrative exposure therapy, which is where you basically work with the individual to get their trauma narrative. Now, yes, eventually you do want to get that trauma narrative, but you want to do it on that person's time. So with you, I would love for you to even talk a little bit about when you felt comfortable, what that felt like, and the space I gave you to be able to tell me the story, and also even talk about how there were additional pieces. So you told me a huge chunk, but then you added onto it over time.
Right. So I don't know if you remember, but I called you in the middle of the night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning when I called you to tell my narrative.
Yep.
The reason why I did it was because I went to the movies earlier that night, and something happened that triggered me. And when I got home, I was just a mess. And in my heart, I knew I need to tell Somi my story. I need to tell Somi my story. And Somi has always told me and taught me, just, you gotta go with your feeling. So I called up Somi at like 1 o'clock in the morning. She answered. I didn't expect an answer in all honesty because of the time. But she answered. I told her what happened. And then later on, some bits, I was in when I told her I was very much emotional, so not everything came out until later on. Eventually, more and more came out. And Yeah, it was a relief.
Yeah. And I remember it was a process. It's like it
Mhm.
started at 1 o'clock that morning and you told me a chunk. And then the next time we met, you added to the story and you kept adding. And there were times where I could tell that this was pushing you a little too much, even though you were initiating it. So I even had to empower you to say, hey, you know, we can take a break. We can take a step back. It's not necessary for you to have like a vomit moment, as I call it. It's like,
Right, and I
you
have
don't need to
issues with
just
that
go,
a lot. You know that, so me. Yeah. I'm like, let's just get this done, and you're like, just let's calm down. Let's have a breathing session.
yeah, I know. I remember. You remember the first few sessions? I was all about okay, and that was the other thing is in my trauma treatment and being trauma informed. I use more of a mindfulness approach.
Mhm.
I always have. Years ago, I became a certified yoga teacher just because I was a yoga practitioner for years. And I kept saying to myself, and I used it on young kids, and I saw the effects, and I was like, this would be fantastic to use for traumatized individuals. And how many times did we, you're telling me a story, we take a break, and I'm like, okay, Savannah, I want you to go into child pose now.
Yes, yes. She would put me to sleep sometimes. She's like, get in a comfortable position. I'm gonna put on bows. We're gonna breathe, and then she'd be like, Savannah, Savannah, are you
I
there?
know. Yeah, no, but again, that was just, and I've always told you, you're the expert. I tell all my clients this. There's not an individual that I've worked with where I don't tell them, I'm learning from you. You're going to lead me on the path that is the best for you and is suitable for you to get to where you would like to go. This has nothing to do with me. So, and we're going to talk a bit about that towards the end about the 3 pillars of trauma informed care. But I wanted us to, segue a little bit into some of your experiences now that we're talking about yoga. And then even your safety backpack that, we'll talk a little bit about with Exceptional Heroes and how Exceptional Heroes came about.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about the whole laying on the back thing. So before she talks about that, a lot of people that are not trauma informed do not realize that, especially sexual violence victims or survivors, but most traumatized individuals that feel very helpless and powerless laying on their back. It's actually triggering for them. And so that was one of the first things, especially when we were doing some yoga poses. Everybody knows Savasana. You lay on your backs and it's relaxation. And I'm like, no, not for a sexual violence victim that was on their back. So tell me a little bit, or, tell the audience a little bit about your experience not too long ago going to a doctor.
Yeah, so I had to go to a doctor to get an IUD put in place and then to get checked. Well, the doctor was trauma aware, but not trauma informed. So when we would go to sessions, she would like question me really hardcore, which was very triggering for me. And then when we got to the operation part, because I had to be put under, um, they had me on my back, and they weren't very. Some of the nurses were, but the doctor was really not helpful, even though I was trying to communicate in a state where I was very emotional. And when my mom would try to cut in, um, trying to inform her on what's happening and what needs to be done, she goes, "No, I just need to hear from Savannah because I'm 22." So she figures I'm adult, I have to talk on my own. But in some cases, I can't, and that's why my mom is there to help advocate for myself. And being put on my back, even though I was asleep, when I got out of it, it threw me off, and I went to a PTSD episode. Which, when me and Somi talked about it afterwards, she said the reason why was because I was on my back and everything that happened beforehand.
Yes. So yeah, it was interesting. I think the word you and your mother used with me is like, Somi, are you psychic?
Yes.
Speaking of Savannah's mom, is like, so this has been, and again, you can't do trauma-informed care without it being a collective. And we're
Right.
going to talk about, and it's collaboration. It's collaboration with doctors. It's collaboration with teachers. Anybody that is instrumental in that survivor or victim's life, it needs to be in the loop. And so, from the get-go, it was not just I was working with Savannah, but I was also, her mom was engaged and I was explaining something. So it was a very much of a psychoeducational period for a long time. And the beauty, I'm going to shout out your mom, the beauty of Savannah's mom, Georgie, was that she was so receptive, which is so necessary, because I'm an unconventional therapist, as you,
She is.
Savannah.
She very much is, and I love it.
Savannah was used to all these things, and then here I come, and I'm like, so listen, you are really the therapist. And she's like, no, I didn't say that, but um, but in my mind, and just even letting her know, Savannah, you're not broken. There's nothing like, off with you. You had an event, a situation that occurred, and it's going to take time. It's a process. We're going to heal. But, having that conversation and having worked with, right before I started working with Savannah, I, was the trauma specialist for over 125 Chibok girls at American University of Nigeria. And I remember doing yoga with them on a weekly basis, in addition to, and we're going to talk about this a bit, the breathing exercise that I, introduced you to. And I remember saying to them, you don't need to lay on your back. And they're looking at me like, what? And I'm like, I want you to be comfortable. And if it's not comfortable and you don't feel safe laying on your back, I want you to lay on your side. And it really comes down to that, is safety, and taking back power, that was, kind of stripped from you in that moment. And again, having doctors that are trauma informed recognize and know, okay, yeah, you don't do this with a trauma survivor or victim, is very important. But again, like I said, a lot of people are trauma aware but not informed. Here's another one: the closing of the eyes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
you want to talk about that one?
Yes. So there have been times where people, or sometimes even in our sessions, you're like, Savannah, if you can, close your eyes, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. And the reason being, and Somi gives the option, because for some survivors, closing of the eyes is not a big issue. And for some of us, it is. And so the closing of the eyes is because sometimes you're forced when you are in those situations, which can be very triggering later on. Um, I'm trying to think of a example. I can't think of one right now, but yeah, just I can think of one. So before I met Somi, um, we tried a lot of meditation apps that talk, and when they talk, they always tell you to lay on your back and to keep your eyes closed. Well, that didn't sit well with me. And so when we met Somi and she was telling us about the eye closing, it all made sense. Like everything I tried before I met Somi, and then when she explained it when I met her, it all clicked in my head.
Yeah. So here is the, I don't know, more of the in-depth aspect to why having a trauma survivor or victim close their eyes when they're not ready. Again, this is about readiness and you doing mindful check-ins as to where they are emotionally and physically. So a lot of sexual violence victims, when they're in that moment, they close their eyes to get out of their body. So it's like happening to them, but so it's almost a form of disassociation. So a lot of times, and in my work with a lot of survivors and victims, what I found was that closing the eyes created flashbacks.
Yeah.
So they would start to see imagery of what they went through and because their mind was going, and they know that they're in this state and whatever the case may be. So it became a thing, and I learned this first with little children, 8, 9 years old, like gosh, almost 10 years ago. I remember this little girl said, at the time I was married, she's like, Miss Dem, do I have to close my eyes? And I said, that would be preferable. She's like, well, I see these things when my eyes are closed. And I said, you know what? If you need to keep your eyes open, that's fine. Just find a focal point or something you can focus on. Because one of the concerns initially was like, okay, if you guys have your eyes open, then you're going to get distracted and all this other stuff. But there's still a way to kind of to get to the aspect of either quieting the mind or trying to silence the mind, or the agenda of the exercise without having the eyes closed. So, I know those are two big things that, we dealt with earlier on in your, as your treatment has progressed, that I thought we should talk about. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, so when I first met you, I talked to you about the 3 pillars of trauma-informed care. And now this is where I get to quiz you about it.
Oh, no, I didn't study. Oh, great.
You remember the first one? What's the first one?
Oh, goodness. I know it's physical,
Physical and what?
emotional,
Yep. Physical and emotional what?
safety.
Yeah.
Yes. It's the
Okay.
third one I have trouble with, which aggravates me.
All right. So the first pillar is physical and emotional safety. So interesting enough, today on my mindful wellness challenge was about physical and emotional safety. So in trauma-informed care, a lot of people definitely focus on the physical aspect of it. When we think physical safety, you want to take that individual out of the space in which they could be physically harmed. That's very clear. However, what we don't really focus on is the emotional safety part. And where that comes into place is giving that person space and room to show up with all the emotions, with all the stuff, how messy and everything is. So you're essentially, so it goes even beyond like rapport. It's you're listening and connecting in a way that they feel emotionally safe to be themselves. And for a lot of survivors and victims, they always tell me, like, this is the first time. Yeah. This is the first time. I remember, I think I asked you, I said, hey, Savannah, tell me your story. And I wasn't talking about your trauma narrative. I wanted to know about you. And you're like, you want me to do what?
I'm like, you want to hear my whole life? And you're like, yeah.
Exactly. And so I know that I've done this for years with most of my clients. I always start off with, I want to know you. This isn't about what has happened to you. I want to know you. How do you describe yourself? How do you see yourself then, now? And I normally ask them to go chronologically. Yes. That's what I did with you. I said, start with your earliest memory and let's just go down the line. Because the essence of that for me is to also help the individual to kind of connect to elements of when things weren't so doom and gloom and this thing hadn't happened to them. And sometimes it also unpacks some pre-trauma. So a lot of times we focus on the trauma that happened that significantly changed things. But a lot of times we forget that people had lives prior to that, and there could have been elements of trauma there. So looking at the whole story helps you, at least helps you to connect the person to their life and give, rejuvenate them, invigorate them, inspire them based on their life. So talk a little bit about that process of, getting to an emotionally safe place. Because we know, and even feeling physically safe, that was a bit of a challenge in the beginning.
Well, I had a lot of trust issues, so I didn't trust right away. So when you asked me to tell my story, it made it a little bit more comfortable. And then, like, over time, our bond became a little well, a lot stronger. And like now we just call each other and text each other. Like Somi's family. She's not my therapist. She's family. But emotionally being safe, it was it felt good because for a long time I wasn't, and everyone forgets about the mind and they always think about the physical and never when our brain does a lot, but it's also really sensitive and we need to keep it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think now, obviously, mental health, mental wellness is now at the forefront, and we're shifting to not just a focus on mental illness. And we're going to talk about that on a different day, the difference
Yeah.
between mental illness, mental health, and mental wellness, which is a lot of people don't know that there's much of a difference. But that's important that you mention that. And so then the second pillar is of trauma-informed care.
So me.
That was good. So it's self-regulation, but it's also, I say it's a combination of self-regulation and co-regulation. And the reason why I kind of expounded on that is because sometimes you need to start, especially with trauma victims and survivors, you have to start with co-regulation first before they can self-regulate. So I'm going to have you talk a bit. Again, this is where I get to shout out your mom because, you know, she would call. I mean, you remember those beginning days? That summer was bananas.
Oh my gosh, I think we called her every day.
Yeah, that summer was a bananas, but it was also, we can look back at it and, you know, even though it was a challenge because we had to figure out the right fit for you.
Right.
And that's another thing we're going to talk about is, you know, there's not this one way of doing things, and you have to tailor it specific to that client, and that client has to be very, very involved in what works for them and what does not. So in regards to co-regulation, I want the analogy the best explain this is when you have a child. And so I'm a mother. My son is going to be 6 soon, and Savannah and Donald are in a pod.
We are. We both don't like therapy.
And so Donald, when he was younger, if he was crying, to calm him, and most mothers do this or caregivers do this, you bring the child close. And what that essence of doing that is you are regulating their emotions and how they feel by your breathing and your regulation. So it's always, I always tell parents or caregivers or whoever's working with trauma survivors or victims that if you are in a calm space, if you are regulated, we have mirror neurons in our brain, literally. It may take a few minutes or whatever, but that individual, you'll start to co-regulate them. And it's almost like a child learning to walk. So you hold their hands for a little bit, and they take some steps and they fall, and that falling is them being dysregulated. But then they get back up, you help them back up, and eventually the child starts to walk. And that's the element of self-regulation. So why don't you talk a little bit about shifting from co-regulation and me working with your mom and then moving to more self-regulation and your safety backpack?
Sometimes I still feel like I'm co-regulating. But yeah, so my mom was a big part of my co-regulating. She was always there in my PTSD episodes and other episodes that I had during the time. And Somi helped her. She would talk her through it. Sometimes my whole family was there. She would have to talk to all of them. I mean, my goodness, she would probably be exhausted afterwards. She just and then and my mom was with me with all my therapy sessions. She actually sometimes would tell Somi what happened. And now we're at a point where it's just me in therapy sessions and I'm talking about what happened during the week. And Somi knows that's very hard for me to do because I don't want to say it.
Yeah. Yes.
But it eventually gets out, and she helps me through it. But yeah, my mom was a big part of it. Family members were helped out when they could because my mom traveled before COVID a lot, and so they had to be there. So me educated them, and then now here I am talking by myself with Somi in my
I
session.
know, I know. I like the evolution of that is just so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see because I remember those early days. Like literally, when you said there were times it was your mom, and sometimes it was the whole family. You
Yeah.
know, I was on the phone, like, okay, do this, try this, and we would just be patient and till we got your central nervous system to calm down and let you know that tell your amygdala, which is your alarm system in your brain, that there wasn't any danger. And a lot of times you would go to, put on the bells, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then, you would come to a place of calm, which one of the things, again, being trauma informed, when we are in a heightened state or dysregulated, the left side of our brain shuts down. So it's your emotional brain takes over. It just goes on overdrive. So the cognitive aspect of your brain cannot articulate, cannot express what is going on. So all you hear is like, ah, 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 ah. And so for most people, they're like, oh my gosh, this is killing me. But given my years in this and just my temperament, the the key for me was I sitting with you in all of that, which is hard to do for people, even therapists, is to sit with your client in like some of the darkest moments and not feel like, oh, I gotta run. Like this is too much for me. I gotta run. But that also involves that you as a therapist are doing your work and you're doing your self-care because it can be a lot. So, just watching that evolution of yourself, your co-regulation, your mom literally having you on her lap, or, I would tell your mom sometimes to cradle you and, to rub, and a lot of it was touching and getting your body to kind of respond to that connection. And then eventually your cognitive side, would wake back up slowly. And then you would say, Somi, I'm so tired. And I'm like, really?
Well,
So, go ahead.
talking about you just sitting there, it's very true. Because I remember one time I threw the phone. I got upset at whatever she said, and I threw the phone.
Yep.
And I still had an episode all the way through the day, and she sat there on the phone.
I did.
Yep.
I'm silent. And
Yep.
that is hard. I remember that day, and I remember thinking to myself, like, she's going like, this woman is bananas. Like, if I threw the phone, that's an indication for you to run and get out of here. And I was like, no, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to be with you. And when you come, when we come through the other side, I'm going to be here too. And that was also very strategic and intentional on my part because I wanted to build emotional safety. I wanted you to be emotionally safe. I didn't want us just to have a good rapport. I wanted you to feel emotionally safe. And, a lot of times, like you said, you have trust issues. That takes time. I mean, with all of us, it takes time. But for me, I've learned from a lot of my clients, like, this is what we need because this is what we're missing and this is what we never got. So if we act this way and you run, we're like, oh, yep, there we go. You proved my
Well,
point.
we talked about that a few weeks ago about because I was having such a hard time doing therapy. You're like, what if I came to you? And
Yes.
we worked that out, which made the therapy a lot easier, and Thursdays a lot easier to do.
Yes. Yes. So throughout this, being trauma informed is again being flexible, extremely flexible. Because the beauty about you, Savannah, is that you shifted from trauma to transformation. Like you, in the midst of some of your darkest days, that's where Exceptional Heroes was born.
Yeah.
You remember that? I mean, I
Yeah.
was it like September 2019, and we're having a session. And you're like, Somi, I want to run something by you, and I'm like, okay. And you're telling me this thing, and I remember saying to you, and I was like, Savannah, that is pure brilliance. And
I
I'm
remember.
listening because the other thing is like, I'm like, wait a second, we just had one of the hardest therapy sessions.
You just threw the phone.
Yeah, I know. You just threw the phone, or you just told me, Somi, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't know how many times I heard that. I was like, and I would be always be like, okay, Savannah, no problem. I'll be here whenever you need me. And you'll be like, and then I'll get a phone call, Somi, I was having a moment, and I'm like, I'm aware.
I
um,
know. I said sit. You
so
gave off a
anyhow,
vibe.
that's the beauty of it. So then the third pillar, which you say you always forget, so I'm just gonna get right to it, is just empowerment. Being trauma informed requires you to empower your clients or whoever you're working with, because a, a lot of what they went through was disempowering.
Mhm.
They felt powerless. They felt their identity was, altered. So many things happened that speak to disempowerment. Even the thing aspect, and I want you to talk about this, how I would constantly say, Savannah, I want you to be assertive.
Yeah.
You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so assertiveness is not my thing even before what happened to me. I don't like confrontation because I feel like assertiveness brings you to confrontation. But after a while, I've become assertive, and sometimes I tell somebody what happened and I say what I say, and she goes, "Wow, Savannah, you've come a long way."
No, and the part of being assertive, I tell people all the time, I feel like most of the time people that are trying to be manipulative or kind of still disempower you in a way will put a negative connotation to assertiveness. And assertiveness doesn't mean you being rude or disrespectful, but it also there's an element of you setting some very hard, concrete boundaries. So for
And
instance,
advocating for yourself.
advocate, exactly. And that was what I kept telling you. I was like,
Yeah.
Savannah, this thing with you and I is not gonna work if you don't tell me. Like, there were times I was like, Savannah, come on, tell me how you feel. Like, not so much how you feel, but tell me, like, Somi, bug off. Like, I don't want to talk today. Set those boundaries, but you can do it in a respectful way. And it's necessary, especially as a survivor. You have to set those boundaries, because if you don't, people are going to frequently test the limits with you. And like you said, advocating for yourself. I love the fact that when you went to the doctor, like, I was like, go Savannah. Like, but again, that's been a process of being able to speak up for yourself and say, no, I don't want this. Or even the mental health breaks. You
Yeah.
want to talk a bit about that? This need, we're in this, you got to do, hustle, hustle, hustle society. And I remember saying to you, I was like, Savannah, if you need a break, take one.
Well,
So
remember when you had me assign days in the
oh, yes.
beginning? So in the beginning, I wasn't doing exceptional hero stuff yet. I was just doing some Instagram stuff with my Rabbit Monroe, and she's like, Savannah, you need to set days. I would like 5 days, but I'm asking for two. And I'm like, you want me to sit around all day and do nothing? And she goes, yes.
Yes.
And that was very much a struggle. But now she still wants me to take days off, which can be hard, but I do it, and it refreshes me to keep working the next few days until my next mental health day. Or sometimes I just take mental health mornings when
Mm-hmm.
I need it.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, for survivors, for victims, and for people advocating for anyone that has gone to any traumatic event, is that those breaks are so necessary, because it's rewiring the brain. And the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of our brain, I love this aspect of our brain, is that it's so neuroplastic. like on a daily basis, the things we do, we get to rewire and teach it how we want it to function. So you are the master of your mind,
Right. Yeah.
essentially. And you get to decide on a daily basis how, this is what I want you got to do. So, again, those three pillars, the physical and emotional safety is number one. The second one is self-regulation or co-regulation. And I find that a lot of times you have to start with co-regulation and then slowly work your way to self-regulation. And then just empowerment. The element of all of this and the beauty of it all is at the end, you become a trauma thriver. You
Right.
become the one that is pouring into other people because you are now you're mentally well. You're not just mentally healthy, but you're mentally well. That means that on a daily basis, you are doing the things to keep you in a good state. So, it's, again, that element of understanding trauma informed and trauma awareness is so key. And
Yes.
any chance I get to educate people about that. And I love the fact that you reached out to me and like, Somi, we need to talk about this. And I'm like, okay. I mean, this has been like since last year? You're
Yeah,
like, we get to talk about
we
this.
didn't know how to do it. Like, do I do a video on it? Do I just write it? And then you came up with the great idea of doing this,
Yes.
and I like it.
Yeah.
I think it helps people register it more because they're hearing us talk about it. We're giving examples.
Yes. So lastly, I wanted you to just briefly talk about, like, through all of this and you moving to a space of being trauma informed, how Exceptional Heroes came about. And just, this Tuesday we did a pre-launch in preparation for the Kickstarter in March, of which I'm so excited for people to get a hold of this therapeutic device, because it's literally going to change the world. And I'm not I don't assign myself to things that I don't really believe in. And more so, it's not just because I'm your therapist, but because I really, truly believe that this is, after 15 years of being in this field, like, this is a much needed device. So if, just talk briefly about that, like how it came to be, given all the different tools that we had to go through to figure out the one that worked for you.
Right. So in the beginning, when I met Somi, she gave me a lot of tools to think about, or not think about, use for like episodes and for mental wellness to do on a daily basis. Because as you always say, don't just do it when you're in trauma, do it all the time.
Yeah.
And so a few months before I told Somi or told anyone, I knew I wanted to make a product, soft plush, that had therapeutic elements in it that was all-inclusive. Because as some of you might have seen my video, my safety backpack has a ton of different stuff. I do Western and Eastern medicine, so I have essential oils. I have breathing balls that Somi introduced me to for controlled breathing. I have stress balls for my self-picking. I have just a whole number of things. Calm, which you introduced me to in my backpack all the time. And so I needed something that I didn't have all this stuff, because when I was in a trauma episode and I had a family member with me, they would have to go through my backpack and try to find all these things that would help, when this device that I made is all in one. So I don't know how much I could talk about it, but it has four of the five senses. It has sensory input for stress, self-picking, and different things like that. It has features to lower blood pressure and lower anxiety. It has so that's Bill. It of course, sight, because I wanted to make sure that it would go with along the lines of the 5 sense grounding exercise.
Yep.
Which I believe you taught me. 5 things you see, 4 things you smell, stuff like that. And so you can see it has aroma on it. for aromatherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's as much as I could say until
Yeah, you know what?
more.
Well, I mean, the gist of it is, like I said, I can't wait for it to be available to the public.
Right.
Um, I think the most amazing aspect of the idea and the creation of this device is that it was all done in the depths of your trauma.
Yeah, it was right in the
It,
beginning, I felt like.
yeah, it was really early in the beginning. So it was amazing, has been amazing to see the evolution of literally going from trauma to transformation. And then what I think I told you when you pitched it to me was that the ability for you to be in such pain and in such of the early stages of healing and to be thinking about other people, because you were literally thinking about, well, if I'm having all this difficulty and Somi's having to take me through all these tool sets and we're trying to figure out, and then you were thinking about some of the people you've worked with and the children, and you're like, who wants to be carrying around like 8 different things all the time? Like you said, when an episode happens, they're like flipping through, like, is this gonna work? Is this gonna work? And you're like, how about if there was just in one device, and then you
Right.
had it? So I am, beyond proud of you. I'm
Thank you.
so proud of you. And I'm not proud of you because of the creation of the device or anything you've done. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Um, because you showed up. You showed up every time. Even though you didn't realize you were showing up, you showed up every time. You showed up as authentically as you could. You showed up with all the pain. You showed up with confusion. You showed up with the anger and everything. And that to me is the beauty of trauma informed care and the beauty of watching a transformation. So I want to say, as we close, I am immensely just proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you guys so much for just being with us, and just this is how we normally are. These are our therapy sessions are like this.
Yeah.
And that's
I mean, one time
not,
I was crying my eyes out, and she goes, "You have really nice eyebrows." And
yeah.
and I was like, I just started laughing.
I know, I remember that. I was like, yeah, and I was like, this woman's gonna think I'm so crazy. But again, it's like I tend to see the beauty in it all, even in the mess of it all. I tend to see the beauty in it all. And I was like, I don't even know how, like, she realizes how great her eyebrows look right now.
She's like, they're so on point.
Yes, like they're so well done. So, to your IG people and my IG people, you just got a tidbit of what, therapy with Somi and Savannah looks like. And that was our intention. I told her, I said, if we're going to do this, we're going to be authentic and we're going to be
Yep.
natural. I don't want any of that, pretense. Like, I am who I am. You are who you are. And we both have interesting personalities.
Yes. Yes.
So, I am so grateful that we get to journey together, Savannah.
Yes. And we're going to be doing this every week. Next week, we're going to do a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, just DM me or Somi. Somi, do you want to say your Instagram name for my followers?
Yes, I am Somiari Bella. So you can DM me at Somiari Bella. Don't ask me why. Don't.
All right. So you heard it there. You can DM her or me for any questions, and we'll answer them next week. Also, in next week's what do you want to call this, Somi? Session? I don't know. Our talk. We'll find something better. But you can comment. We'll answer them as well. And you want to sign out?
Yes, thank you
Okay.
all so much. We're so grateful for everybody that joined us. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you making the time to just, connect with us. We do listen, we love, and we connect.
Yes.
All
Yep.
right,
Okay.
bye.
Bye. Hmm. How do I exit out? Okay.